Hey everyone, how you doing today? This is Coach Gilbert, and today I just want to talk to you about how I set my power training zones using WKO5 and VO2 Master via an aerobic threshold test, which is basically a step test. Okay. I would like to start with a quick quote from a very good coach, Vince Lombardi, which says, "Practice does not make perfect. Only perfect practice makes perfect." Um, each of us is going to have a meaning for this quote, but in my case, it just means that it means that if you're going to be training for the sake of perfection, you have to be training in the proper way and not just going out there and training just to go out there and ride. Like, if that's what you want to do, of course, that's a lot of people do that. There's nothing against that, but if you are training for perfection, then you have to have a more stringent and rigid training plan. So that's what I get from this quote, and what it implies to what does it take to become a champion. So with that in mind, I want to go over why do we need training zones. Training zones, it's really what's going to keep us focused on whatever training we are doing. If we are training for a criterium, if we're training for a mountain bike race, each type of race is going to be a little bit different than the other. So the specific training that goes along with that, it's going to be different for every single one. And how are we going to be able to control those intensities? How are we going to know how fast is fast? How many watts? It's the watts that needs to be put in for how long. So that's where the training zones come into play. Training zones, they're gonna optimize your training intensity. Of course, we're gonna be able to target the specific systems within the body, either muscular systems or aerobic systems, but we're gonna have a location where, if we know that we train on that area for a certain amount of time, we're gonna be able to train the targeted system. It's also gonna help us monitor our progress, or the progress of an athlete. We're gonna be able to know how much time they're spending in what zones, the amount of stress that's putting into the body. So if we have somebody that's racing all the time, we're going to be able to know that he races all the time, that the intensity is high all the time. So that way we can work around that. But we can only work with what we know. So that's why it's very important to have some way of gauging all the efforts, so that we can again know where we stand. And with that in mind, it's gonna help you prevent overtraining. So again, if we know that somebody's racing very often, how often is too often? This is gonna assist us in figuring that out. Let's say that somebody's training at certain zones for a certain amount of time, but then he's trying to do a lot of continuous races, which ask for his body to put that amount of power which he's not used to. Then we know we gotta back it down a little bit, because if not, either it's gonna overtrain, it's gonna give a bad result, it could even get an injury. So again, it's very important. As I kind of discussed earlier, it kind of enhance your race preparation. So if we, for example, are doing a mountain bike race and there's a certain course you need to prepare for, then we need that, let's say there's a couple different climbs in the course. There could be some training protocol made to assimilate those conditions. So let's say you need 400 watts for 3 minutes or something like that. So then that could be made around your specific race, so that way you're as prepared as you can be for that event. And of course, with that we can create, as mentioned, a personalized training plan, which would allow us to work all that in and maximize the efficiency of the athlete time, making sure that he is training on the correct zones. And if he's racing for a mountain bike race or a criterium, he's not just doing zone 1 or zone 2 work, which is low intensity work, because then he's not going to be able to push the efforts when they are required. So very important. That's why we need training zones. It's one of the most basic things when it comes to a training program. So it's very important that they are set correctly. A lot of people have different ways of setting the zones. Some use test. Some use for example an FTP test. Some can use the VO2 max test. Some can use an 8-minute test. Some can use a step test. There's a lot of different ways. So this is my method that I have found to be the best and the most exact. And for me, really being as exact as possible on your training zones, it is very important, because if you are out by 5% or 10% out of your zone, then you're really not working as efficiently as you could, and there are gains to be had. Always remember, try to work and get the lowest hanging fruit. And of course, consistency is one of the ones that we always have to work with, but also keeping our training plan up to date and up to our current fitness level. It's very important, because that way we know exactly how much an athlete can push at any given point. And it's always going to be changing. When what 1 month is or a week is not going to be the same as another one. So all that has to be taken into consideration. So how do I like to get my training zones? There's 2 main components for it. We of course like to do a VO2 max test, which is an aerobic threshold test, a step test with VO2 Master, basically, where from there we can get both how your aerobic numbers, your aerobic threshold numbers, but also get a clear picture of how the athlete biological markers are at. So it is a very good initial test that gives us a lot of information very quickly, but that is not the entire picture that we need. In reality, we need a baseline. We need to test the athlete over multiple days and make an initial assessment, so that we can see that test was not a fluke, that it did have the correct information, that the athlete is able to either sustain that power, or maybe let's say that the athlete was not used to the test, so he didn't do as good. So we need to make sure that that's his actual zone. So we correlate with initial set of power profile test, 20-second max test, 3-minute max test, 5-minute max test. This is a profile that's gonna be it's gonna be built for WKO5, and it's gonna be analyzed by the application, like read and analyzed by the application, and that way it's gonna be able to provide us with something called eye levels based on all that information that we provide. And those eye levels are always gonna be changing. They're depending on the power profile of each athlete for the last 3 months or so. So that's why we always just gotta keep everything up to date. But with doing the initial aerobic test, threshold test, and then doing the initial set of power profile tests, then we have our initial set of power zones. But again, because they're always changing, we have to be remembering to test like every 6 to 8 weeks, so that we keep up to date with our numbers and we're always training as efficient as we can possibly be. So as far as my training zones, again, I use a 10 level training zone setup. Basically, it's, all most of the training thresholds, they're based out of traditional 3 level training zone, like back when they did the lactic test, which is, one zone one is like a recovery. Zone 2 is, kind of like the tempo section, and zone 3 is more the anaerobic, like the VO2 max section. So it's similar in my zones. The only thing is that we have 10 different zones, so that we are able to target the specific systems for the body. So for example, under the traditional 3 level, under level 1, we have level 1, which is recovery, and level 2, which is your zone 2, your endurance riding. And that endurance riding, we do correlate it with the anaerobic, or the aerobic threshold test, that we did with VO2 Master, to where the number that we're gonna try to reach for that zone 2, it's gonna be your aerobic threshold 1, and from there, we do your zone 2 around that threshold, which usually, depending on the athlete, but it would be like 7 watts under and 3 watts over the threshold. That would be like your zone 2, and then we go into which would be the traditional zone 2 on the 3 level system, which would be considered of the tempo zone, the sweet spot zone, and then of course your FTP, your threshold zone. And in that scenario, all those 3 zones are gonna be under your aerobic threshold number 2. Which is basically where your VO2 max is set. Zone number 6 is basically that section where your aerobic threshold number 2 is located at, and then we usually add like 10 watts to try to get the athlete to gain a little bit more power from that area, to be able to sustain more, above a AT2 basically. And then from there, we have basically our FRC FTP zone, FRC, and our PMAX zones. Basically, FRC, I like to think about them as your matches, as the matches for when you're racing. Let's say that you do like a 2-minute effort, 1-minute effort, 250% of your FTP or something like that, then that would be considered something like a match. So that's something that we can again train, like if we tackle at the zone at a certain time. And again, everybody's different. And then PMAX, that's just maximum power output. So your maximum for 5 seconds, for example. So yeah, 2 seconds, 5 seconds. So those are basically the 10 zones that I use. There's a little bit more information online, of course, if you want to read about what each zone works, or what systems it works. But I just wanted to explain to you how I use the training zones, how I set them, and how I explain them to my athletes as well. And with the training, we use a combination of all these zones. Majority of the time, they're gonna be on zone 2, but intervals, we work anywhere from zone 3 to zone 10, and then of course we use quite a bit of recovery as well. How much do? I try to do somewhere, the famous 80-20, but in reality, every athlete is different. So some people could be 90-10, some people could be, 60-40. That's really the highest that I would go if there for a little bit of time. But usually, 30-70 for pretty advanced athletes. But yeah. So just to get a rough idea. So yeah, thank you for listening to how I, set up my training zones and how I prescribe them to my athletes. If you need to reach me, here is my information. The easiest way, you can go to Instagram, Gilberto Cortez, add me as a, follow me, and then send me a direct message, and I should be answering pretty quickly. Okay, thank you, and I hope that you have a really nice day. Goodbye.